Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Examiners of this Progress Examination. Good morning, Pak Doni Sofyan, Ibu Diani Prades Pratiwi, and Ibu Dia Cahya Iman. And the Honorable my thesis supervisor, Ibu Malu Zayani. In this special occasion, I'm Najwa Ulin Nuha, an English department student. I would like to thank to the examiners who have given me an opportunity to present my thesis with the title The Portrayal of Race-Based Traumatic Stress and Its Effects on Black Female Characters on Anne Patrice Street. I'm sorry. Let's start from the background of the study. Anne Patrice Street follows Lottie Johnson's as a Black single mother navigating racial discrimination, poverty, and violence in 1940 centuries in Harlem, New York City. This study is significant for two reasons. First is uh, Crenshaw claims that the intersections between race and gender creates multiple barriers for women of color. And second, race-based traumatic stress or RBTS describe the psychological harm caused by cumulative racism, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD like symptoms. Most prior research focuses on sociological and feminist angles. This study fills the gap by centering RBTS on Latinx characters. Um, this this leads to two research questions. First research question is what are the violence and injustice depicted in the street through Lottie Johnson, and how does her misery reflect the situation in the USA around the 1940th century? The research question number two, how does race-based traumatic stress experienced by Lottie Johnson shape her psychologically? This research used three interlocking theories. The first is sociological literary criticism by Tori Eagleton, to read the street as a critique of racial and class oppression. And then the second is race-based traumatic stress. um, Talk about racism causes psychological injury, not a disorder, but a one, leading to hypervigilance, denial, and traumatic breakdown. And the last is Black Feminist Theory by Patricia Hill Collins and Crenshaw. Talk about race, gender, and class intersect to create unique operation for Black women that cannot be understood through any single lens alone. And then before we come to the main analysis of this research, um, it is essential to understand the social context of the United States in the 1940th century, which forms the historical background of the novel. Actually, there are four key conditions that relevant to this study. First is World War II and economic impact. The economic growth primarily benefit white men at the era. Black workers face a loss higher and first fired. The reality and the median incomes of Black families was approximately $1,000 per year, that compared to $2,500 for white families. And the second is the Jim Crow laws enforce the racial segregation in schools, transportation, housing, and workplaces, support by violence and intimidation to maintain the racial hierarchy. And the third one is the shifting gender roles. The women entered the workforce during the war, but were the were pushed back into domestic roles once the war ended. And Black women were doubly excluded from the economic and social gains of the post-war period. And the last is the social position of Black women. They face that what Crenshaw described as a double jeopardy discrimination on the basis of both race and gender, with severe economic burdens placed especially on single mothers. Next, for answering the question number one, Luti experiences three interconnected forms of violence. First is the sexual intimidation. Jonas, as the landlord, surveys her body as an object from their very first meeting, like and later violates her privacy by entering her apartment and handling her belongings. Uh, and the second is physical assault. Bootsmith forcibly kisses and grab Lati in his car. Her resistance highlight her vulnerability as a black working class woman. And next is workplace discrimination. Lati is dismissed as a colored wench who posed a sexual trait reflecting the hypersexual stereotype project onto black women. And the last is environmental entrapment. The threat itself is personified as a oppressive force. It did everything it could to discourage the people walking along the street. Mm. And then Lati Misery and then uh, sorry. Um, Luti's suffering is not merely a personal story. It is a mirror of American social condition in the 1940 century. When we compare the novel's narrative with historical reality. In the novel, Luti is rejected from employment due to racial and sexual labeling. In history, black women were widely subjected to the hypersexual stereotype, which systematically denied them access to dignified work. In the novel, Luti remains trapped in poverty despite her hard work and determination in history in 1940th century United States. Um, I'm sorry, in history, census data shows an income gap in over 60% between black and white families. And in the novel, Luti is subjected to sexual exploitation by men of various racial backgrounds. In history, black women were afforded little legal protection from racially and gender motivated violence. And then in the novel, Luti cannot escape the structural poverty of Harlem. In history, the Great Migration offered help, but urban life in the North largely replicated the same the same system of operation found in the South. Um, Through Luti's story, Anne Petrie delivers a powerful literary critique of the American dream myth as experienced by Black women in mid-20th century America. And then, in answering the second research question, the analysis identifies several states of RBTS that progressively shape Luti's psychology. The first stage is denial and self-blame. The key quotation is, "She was capable of both," she concluded, referring to hard work and self-sacrifice. Before moving to Harlem, Luti worked as a domestic worker for a wealthy white family. She witnessed how hard work produced prosperity for them. What she failed to recognize was that this prosperity was accessible only to those who already held privilege. Rather than identifying the system as unjust, Lati turns inward and blames herself. In RBTS theory, denial and self-blame are early symptoms of racial trauma that can progress toward depression. And the second is awareness begins to emerge through this quotation that from the time she was born, she had been hemmed into an ever narrowing space. The wall had been built up brick by brick by eager white hands. It's told that Luti finally recognized that her circumstances are not product of bad luck of personal failure. They are the deliberate result of white supremacist structures. This feeling of entrapment and having no way out lies at the very heart of our BTS. Next is hypervigilance and internalized racism. Uh, The quotation like this: "She tried to scream, and when she opened her mouth, no sound came out, and she thought it was worse than any nightmare." During the scene of where Jones drags Lutis toward the cellar door, um, Lutis' body responds by freezing, a neurobiological reaction to extreme threat. The praise that worse than any nightmare captures her recognition that this is a waking reality she cannot escape by simply opening her eyes. And the next is um, internalized racism and self-defense. Self-doubt, I'm sorry. Self-doubt. The question like wondering if there was something about her that subtly suggests to the supper that she would become his love making. This said that Luti begins to question whether something within herself invites violence. This is RBTS symptoms like victims observe racist and sexist assumption about their own bodies, turning externally inflicted harm into internal self-doubt. And the last is zoo metaphor. Like Lottie said that she thought of the animals at the zoo and she was becoming something like that. It tells us like Lottie identifies with caged animals, creatures confined to a space far smaller than their natural habitat. She sees herself as a trap in Harlem by a racial system she cannot escape. This metaphor externalizes the sense of confinement that is central to the RBTS experience. Next, as the climax of the novel is represents the most dramatic manifestation of accumulated RBTS. The first is there are a sequence of events. First is trigger, reach rapid, and dissociation and escape. Like the trigger boots offers Letty to Junto as a sexual transaction, and then the traumatization is Letty relief past assault, hallucination, and extreme emotion, extreme emotional dysregulation follow, and then dissociation that she was thinking not at Bootsmith but at a handy anonymous figure. Boots symbolize the entire system that she faced. And the last is escape or one way. She encountered there's a one-way ticket. I've had one since the day I was born. We come to the conclusion that from the full analysis present, this study arrived at four main conclusions. First is Luti experiences physical, psychological, and social violence roots in the intersections of race, gender, and class, reflecting the real condition of Black women in 1940th century South America. And the second is the novel is not merely personal narrative, but a powerful critique of Jim Crow law, America, economic exclusion, and the American dream myth as applied to Black women. And the third is RBTS profoundly shapes relatives psychology from initial denial and self-blame and through hypervigilance and internalized racism to a final traumatic breakdown. And the last is Luti's tragic trajectory demonstrates how prolonged racial trauma can destroy psychological resilience, filling a gap in scholarship by centering RBTS in Petrus' work. And this study contributes to filling an existing gap in the scholarship. Most prior research focused on sociological and feminist theory, with deeply examining the dimension of psychological trauma. This study fills that gap by applying RBTS theory specifically to Lottie Johnson's character. And then um, for future research, uh, for the I'm sorry. This I have recommendation for the future research. Like I'm sorry.